Welcome to Hack Your Happiness.
Hello, I'm Mercedes, one of your co-hosts, and I'm so thrilled that you've decided to join us for today's interview with Dr. Aditi. She is a Harvard stress expert and truly so phenomenal and full of wisdom. We all deal with stress, whether it's at work, at school, with our relationships, anything. Or maybe sometimes we just feel stressed and we don't even know why. Well, prepare to know all of the answers to these questions and to these regular occurrences that we all experience. This episode is filled with facts, with tangible hacks to feel less stressed, as well as some really cool comparisons from our ancient brain to our modern brain. So I really enjoyed this interview, and I'm definitely going to be sending this episode link out to some of my friends and family because, again, stress is such a relatable topic. I think we all experience stress. In fact, Dr. Aditi shared today that stress is the rule, not the exception. In a room of 30 people, 21 experience burnout or anxiety or stress, and that's a wild statistic. So be sure to send this episode out, spread some happiness and care to the people that you care about in your life, and let's get into the conversation. Today, we're speaking with Dr. Aditi Nerurkar.
Before I became a doctor with an expertise in stress, I was a stress patient. And when I was in my medical training, working 80 hours a week, one particular day I was rounding on my patients and I felt a stampede of wild horses across my chest. It really, quite literally knocked the wind out of me.
Dr. Aditi Nerurkar.
Aditi Nerurkar.
Dr. Aditi Nerurkar is a Harvard physician.
This is like the stress doctor.
Your book, all about different stress resets. What are those and what is your favorite one?
Your amygdala, which is a small almond-shaped structure deep in your brain, its sole purpose is survival and self-preservation. When you're leaving your home and turning the doorknob to enter the world, you'd say to yourself,
how does the teenage brain handle stress in comparison to the adult brain, and what might be some physical signs that we can look out for?
The human brain is developing at every stage of life, but perhaps no more important than those teenage formative years. And so when you're thinking about stress, you want to think about
what are some examples of our ancient brain in modern life?
That amygdala is your emotional center. It houses your emotions, your feelings, your thoughts, your innermost thoughts. Everything that we do comes from that amygdala. In science, we call it your reptilian brain, believe it or not, because
Welcome to Hack Your Happiness.
Welcome, Dr. Aditi.
I am so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hack Your Happiness is a podcast designed to bring you the behind the scenes of what brings iconic individuals happiness, plus their life hacks.
I'm Mercedes.
And I'm Anastasia.
Yes, thank you. You are an incredible Harvard stress expert, renowned doctor, and a sought-after speaker. So taking a step back, could you give us a little bit of a brief overview of what your journey has looked like up to this point?
Sure, that's a great place to start. So before I became a doctor with an expertise in stress, I was a stress patient, looking for answers and in desperate need of change. And when I was in my medical training, working 80 hours a week, one particular day I was rounding on my patients in the cardiac ICU and I felt a stampede of wild horses across my chest. And it really, quite literally knocked the wind out of me. So my nurse and I, the nurse I was working with, gave me some orange juice. Feeling passed within seconds and I kept working. But that stampede of wild horses followed me night after frustrating night as my head would hit the pillow at the end of the day after a long, we worked 30-hour shifts regularly, 80 hours a week. And then I finally went to go see my doctor. And when I went to see my doctor and asked my doctor, for sure thinking it was my heart, my doctor said, oh no, and did all the testing and said, it's just stress, try to relax. So I did what everyone does when you think about, what do I want to do to relax? I watched movies, I went out for retail therapy, had dinner with friends, took vacations. Nothing really seemed to work. And that's when I put my scientist hat on and started reading and digging into the science of what is this thing called stress. Because of course my first reaction was stress. Stress doesn't happen to people like me, I'm resilient. And then little by little, over about 2 to 3 months, 4 months, I found my way out of stress. And that's when I vowed to become the doctor I needed during that difficult time. So when I became a doctor, I wouldn't say, oh, it's just stress, which is utterly unhelpful to someone experiencing stress. And so that's kind of my origin story of how I became a doctor with an expertise in stress.
We just want to take a quick pause from today's interview and tell you about our happiness wellness game that Anastasia and I have designed, Mission Small Bits of Happiness.
It has 100 unique activities to do every day to find more happiness. The idea is you just have to pull out one of the cards once a day and help find out what brings you and your loved ones more happiness.
You can do it around the dinner table, in the mornings, or even keep it on your desk. So Anastasia, pull out a card.
Spin Spend some time in the sunlight. Open your curtains, go to your patio/deck to do schoolwork or read.
And the best part is that each card also tells you a quick line about the science behind why any given activity will make you feel happier. So the reason why sun will make us feel happier is because sunlight increases our brain's release of serotonin, a happiness neurotransmitter. And then we're gonna place this card behind mission accomplished as soon as we're finished. Grab your own Mission Small Bits of Happiness to support us and bring more happiness to your home. It's linked in the show notes.
Now back to the show.
Oh, that's incredible. I think it's so fascinating how stress can affect us in ways that we don't really recognize or stand out to us. And so for teenagers, how does the teenage brain handle stress in comparison to the adult brain? And what might be some physical signs that we can look out for as teens of stress?
It's such an important question, and I love that you both hold space for these conversations, because truly the human brain is developing at every stage of life, but perhaps no more important than those teenage formative years. I remember being a teenager myself and never really had any of the coping skills that you talk about a lot, right, on your show, and that self-awareness. And so when you're thinking about stress, you want to think about how are you now compared to how were you maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. Most of us are really different, and we've lived through a really traumatic time, both individually and collectively, right? So for teenagers now, 5 years ago, you were maybe in your early teenage years or your elementary school years, and that was the time that the pandemic was happening. And we know based on the science that the ones that were affected most deeply by the quarantining and being at home was actually the elementary school kids. I'm not a pediatrician, but based on the data and the colleagues that I've spoken to. And so now these elementary school kids grew up to become teenagers, right? And so social connection is so important. And so a lot of the mental health struggles that we may be seeing now, a part of that, not all of it, but a part of it is also because we've just come out of this thing that we don't really talk about anymore. You know, we are certainly living this new post-pandemic life, but we've all suffered so much, both individually and collectively. And so when you're thinking about the various ways that teenagers experience stress, there are so many. And so they have some of the similar symptoms as adults. So stress, whether it's be teenagers or adults, there are so many different kinds and flavors of stress. So stress can be bodily symptoms and mental health manifestations. So what are some physical health manifestations of stress? Headaches, pain, fatigue. You might experience abdominal pain, back pain, low energy, and some mental health manifestations of stress: anxiety, depression, irritability, quick to anger. Now, your teenage years, I remember my teenage years so well. There's so many changes in the body, physically, mentally. You're also managing a lot of that social connection, right? Like the peer group, and it's so important about in terms of like how you present yourself to the world and fitting in. And so there's so many factors. And so in many ways, what has happened prior over the past several years has certainly shaped what we're seeing now, in addition to just the normal angst of teenage life. And so stress can show up in so many different ways, mentally and physically, for teenagers, some similar to adults and some different.
Absolutely. You know, it's really important sometimes to like look out for that, and knowing like, oh, I'm constantly getting headaches, and not just being like, oh, it's probably the weather, but knowing that maybe there's something else underlying that's happening.
Looking at like, how did I feel maybe a month ago, or even prior to this event happened, or, you know, taking a step back and then realizing, how do I feel now versus then, to really compare if you're feeling stressed, or maybe it is something different. Maybe you're sick, or maybe it is the weather, right?
Yeah, and also to see your doctor, you know? You don't have to figure this out on your own. Make sure that you're communicating with your parents. Maybe your parents are seeing something different in you that, you know, we're not always very aware of what's happening in our bodies and our minds and how we are behaving. In fact, even me as an expert in stress, my husband will sometimes say, it's time for you to read The 5 Resets again, which is my book, because I'll be a little bit more snippy to him than usual, right? So he's like, and I say to myself, oh my God, you're right, I am stressed. Because it's so easy to just get in your own way. And again, it's not about you. It's not a personal feeling. It's how your brain is designed. When you're feeling a sense of stress, you're living in amygdala mode, which is a part of your brain, and we can talk a little bit about it. But I think the most important thing when you're a teenager, you're feeling a sense of stress. And first is, of course, discuss with your parents, discuss with your loved ones. Maybe it's not a parent, but an adult that you feel a connection to. Talk to your doctor and lean into a sense of community and have a sense of self-compassion, because that is so difficult to cultivate during your teenage years, and really leaning into that, giving yourself lots of grace to figure it out in the process. No one has all the answers, and so, making sure that you're really giving yourself a lot of space and time to figure it out.
Absolutely. And I find it so fascinating because your book, talking all about different stress resets, what are those and what is your favorite one?
So I have my book right here. It is called The 5 Resets, and the subtitle is Rewire Your Brain and Body for Less Stress and More Resilience. And so there's 5 key mindset shifts with 15 science-backed strategies. One of my most favorite ones is get clear on what matters most. And so that's actually the first reset. And what is it? So when you're feeling a sense of stress, I'm sure many people in your audience can relate to this, and you guys and me as well. You might say to yourself, what's the matter with me? Why do I feel like this? And like I said, it's not your fault if you're feeling like you're getting in your own way when you're feeling a sense of stress. Your amygdala, which is a small almond-shaped structure deep in your brain, its sole purpose is survival and self-preservation. That part of your brain is what governs your stress response, your fight or flight response. And so when you're feeling a sense of stress, that amygdala turns on, it's triggered, it's in overdrive, and it's thinking about your immediate surroundings. And so it's really difficult for you to think about the future, make a plan, have some strategic thinking about the future, because future-focused thinking is part of your prefrontal cortex. That's another part of your brain. So if you put your hand on your forehead, it's the area right behind your forehead. That's called the prefrontal cortex, and that governs all of these things like organizing, planning, and that part of your brain, by the way, doesn't fully form until you are 25 years old. So when you are going through your teenage years and early adult years, that part of your brain hasn't fully formed, which is why it's so important that you are making sure that you're taking care of your physical health, your mental health during this time. And so one of my most favorite resets is the first one, which is get clear on what matters most. And when you ask yourself, what's the matter with me? Instead, ask yourself, what matters most to me? It's a way to reframe out of amygdala mode back to your prefrontal cortex. And most is an acronym. Pick a goal that is motivating, objective, small enough to guarantee success, and timely, something you can achieve in about 3 months, knowing that your brain takes about 8 weeks to rewire itself. And so you can have a goal that's, work-related, school-related, social-related. And so when you create a most goal, it's a way to get out of your own way. And so something that you can achieve, whether that means less stress or better grades or more friends or better success at sports or whatever it may be that you're trying to achieve in your life as a teenager. That is, you can create a most goal. And the second really important reset, there's 15 strategies in this book, but one I love is stop, breathe, be, and we can do it together. And so what you want to do is you want to stop, breathe, and be. Ground yourself in the present moment. It's a 3-second brain reset. And when you practice this over and over again throughout your day, what happens over time is that it rewires your brain and it activates something called your mind-body connection, which is that your brain and your body are always in sync and constantly communicating to each other. So it's good for your body, it's good for your brain, and vice versa. And so stop, breathe, be gets you out of that what if thinking, right? Like anxious what if thinking. What if this won't work? What if this fails? What if I fail? What if I embarrass myself? All of these things that are so normal that you may think about. It gets you out of your what if mentality and back to what is in the here and the now. So you can practice stop, breathe, be lots of different points of the day. So you can do it when you're brushing your teeth, when you're eating your breakfast, when you're heading to school, when you're it's a great doorknob moment, when you're leaving your home and turning the doorknob to enter the world, right? Like you could say to yourself, stop, breathe, be. Same thing when you're going into school, going in between classes, turning the lock on your locker. It's great for transitional moments. And if you do that over and over the course of a whole day, what you'll notice over time is that it cultivates your sense of presence and being in the here and the now. It was the first thing that I learned when I was a medical resident, and I would practice it multiple times a day when I would enter the patient room. Again, doorknob moment. I would knock and I would enter the room and I would say to myself, stop, breathe, be. and I would enter. And that was sort of my gateway into this whole world. It was taught to me by a doctor named Michael Bain early on in my medical training when I was going through my own stress struggle. So Stop, Breathe, Be is a great one, coupled with Your Most Goal. But there are so many that we could talk about that apply to teenagers specifically.
That's incredible. I love, Dr. Aditi, that your tips are so tangible. Like, it's not really something that you have to like think too hard about. It's simple to do. You know how to do it. You know when to do it. And I think that's something that teens just really need to have in their toolbox, and everyone of all ages need to have in their toolbox. Is like, okay, if I'm feeling stressed, I set this goal. If I'm feeling stressed, or even if I'm just going into a different situation, or just throughout my day to build it into kind of a part of my routine, part of my habits, just stop, breathe, be. And I think, yeah, these are just such important little tools to have that don't take long but have a big effect.
Yeah, I think for me, when I'm thinking about these various strategies, there's hundreds of them that I could choose, right? First is they have to be cost-free, because I've had lots of patients with lots of varying resources. And so making sure something is cost-free is super important to me. It's got to be time efficient. Having a lot of stress and managing stress and trying to fix your stress should not cause you more stress. And so it has to be time efficient. And of course, science-backed. Everything I say is science-backed. But you're right, it has to be practical, because, if it's doesn't feel good to bring into your life, you won't do it. It doesn't matter how good the science is. It's got to feel easy, effective, and something you can do right away. And that's the beauty of the brain. And so I just want to say one more thing about the brain, is that you think that your brain, it's like, oh, the brain I have at birth is the brain I got for life. Like, it's a real grab bag. But in fact, we now know, based on the science, that your brain is always evolving based on external stimuli and what you take in, what you're surrounded by. And that's called neuroplasticity. It's a long, fancy word. It simply means that your brain is a muscle, just like your biceps. And we understand that, right? Like, if you want to strengthen your biceps, you're going to go to the gym, you're going to do bicep curls, you're going to do things to condition that muscle or your muscles. Same thing with your brain, which is why you can rewire your brain for less stress, because your brain is constantly developing and it's dynamic and in flux. Same reason why that prefrontal cortex right here behind your forehead, that area, doesn't form until you're 25, and you have the power to rewire it, irrespective of what's happened to you in your childhood. I get asked a lot about adverse childhood events or childhood trauma, and yes, it affects your brain very much, but if with the right therapy, trauma-informed care, and lots of good internal work, you can overcome that traumatic experience and, in fact, rewire your brain. So there is hope, not to minimize people's negative and difficult experiences, but just to say that your brain can actively rewire itself to get you to a better place.
That is definitely very hopeful, and I think
Definitely.
that's so true. Sometimes we get into this mindset of like, I'll never be, able to cope with my stress. I'll never be able to get over this event. And I think it's important to realize that our brains are evolving. I think that's so cool. That neuroplasticity, I love that, and I think it's very motivating to try those different resets as you share, because they actually can get more implemented into our lives.
Yeah, and the other thing I think would be super important to share with your audience is this idea of the inner critic. When you are a teenager, that inner critic is so loud. And what is the inner critic? It's that voice in your head that berates you, that tells you that you're not good enough, or smart enough, or attractive enough, or sporty enough, or quiet enough, or confident enough. All of those enoughs, right? We should all over ourselves, right? Like, so often. And instead, when you're really thinking about what is that inner critic, why do we get that voice in our head? We all have it. Adults have it too, but it really develops in your teenage years. And a lot of that is driven by your stress response, believe it or not. That inner critic is governed by your amygdala, that same almond-shaped structure that is focused on houses your stress response. And so how do you dial down the volume of that inner critic that often gets a megaphone when you're feeling stressed? It's like that inner critic is like, you're never going to be able to achieve it, so why don't you just stop now, right? Like, we've all been there. We've all had that inner critic, and the voice gets so loud when we're feeling unsure of ourselves, or when we're anxious or stressed or depressed. And so really leaning into this idea of self-compassion, I mentioned it earlier, when you're a teenager, it's really hard. It's hard to find a sense of self-compassion for yourself, to be gentle with yourself, we're all so hard on ourselves, teenagers most of all. And so really leaning into the sense of self-compassion. Why? Because self-compassion also rewires your brain because of neuroplasticity. It dials down the volume of your amygdala, the stress response. And so if you can find ways to be gentle with yourself through gratitude practice, journaling, self-reflection, there's so many things we could talk about here when it comes to silencing that inner critic. But it's so important, particularly in this teenage population that we're talking about.
Absolutely. I think that's so powerful because I know that everyone, struggles a little bit with that inner critic, but I think having some self-compassion and also thinking about it differently than just the way you would talk to yourself. Like, of course I can talk to myself about this because I just want myself to, be better or work harder, but then think about it. Like, would you talk to your best friend like that or talk to a loved one like that? And you can still motivate someone without completely crushing their self-confidence.
Yeah.
And I completely understand. I love journaling so much. I think it's so helpful for, when you're feeling stressed out or when you feel like everything's just too much and you have too many emotions and you can't even think straight. I find that just writing my feelings down, writing down what happened that day is so beneficial because then afterwards I'm able to kind of look on that and say identify what was really that driving force of anxiety today, what really made me feel stressed out, and then I can kind of either avoid that or just kind of learn from my experiences.
And so something that I'm really interested in as we were talking about the neuroplasticity and how our brains are constantly changing, I'm really curious, is there, I know that we've talked about how we still have a similar brain, or I've heard you speaking about in the past, how we still have a similar brain to our brain thousands of years ago, our ancestors in the past, and sometimes despite the neuroplasticity factor, this can still affect our responses or how we think or act. So what are some examples of our ancient brain in modern life?
Ooh, good question. So many examples. In fact, this prefrontal cortex right here, right? How many times can I point to my forehead in this conversation talking about the prefrontal cortex? The prefrontal cortex and other parts of our brains have evolved through time, through centuries and millennia. However, that amygdala, it's part of a system in our brains called the limbic system. And in science, we call it your reptilian brain, believe it or not, because it's the same brain that has not evolved from, when we weren't these evolved species of Homo sapiens. So we call it reptilian brain for a reason. And so that amygdala, that limbic system, is your emotional center. It houses your emotions, your feelings, your thoughts, your innermost thoughts, your stress response. And so everything that we do comes from the limbic system and that amygdala. And so often, we say your knee-jerk reaction or your instincts. There's so many ways that factors into our everyday life. Sometimes you have a gut feeling about someone, and so there's so many words that we use that harken right back to that mind-body connection. The gut feeling, I don't know, I just had a sense that something was going to happen, or we have so many examples of that. And so throughout your day, you can even start noticing, when is my prefrontal cortex on? When am I thinking, organizing a project for school, or organizing an event, or volunteering, or playing sports. And there's so many opportunities where you're using your prefrontal cortex when you're really thriving. But equally so, there are many moments when we are using our amygdala and that limbic system. A lot of times for good, right? When you sense someone and you're this, I don't know, my instincts are telling me not to trust this person, or you feel that sensation and you can't explain why, and you just know that you have to trust your instincts. No, I don't like this person. I don't know why. Unexplainable, but trust that. And that is also your limbic system. And so throughout your day, you will notice that come up, and it's cave person mode. It's a way to keep you safe. It is your survival and self-preservation mechanism. Your brain is designed expertly to handle short bursts of stress and to really protect yourself, right? We've had to do this for millennia. But what the challenge is, a lot of my work, is in talking about what happens when that system is constantly on. and activated. So when you have that fight or flight response, yes, it's super healthy to have a fight or flight response because you have an acute stress, you respond to it appropriately, you come back to baseline. But what's happened now, and why is that so? Because evolutionarily, you would see a tiger in the forest. Like, this is how we all develop. This is how our brains developed, right? Like, you would see a tiger in the forest and you would either fight the tiger or you would run away. That's where fight or flight comes from. But now the tigers, we don't live in forests anymore. We're not cave dwellers anymore. And so where are these tigers? They're living with us all the time. You might have relationship constraints, financial constraints, deadlines, these looming threats, this little device that we have in our hands, phones and technology, huge source of stress and triggering that fight or flight response. And so it keeps going on in the background, and that's the challenge. And so it's about dialing down the response, because there's actually no such thing as zero stress. By the way, when we talk about stress, and what is stress? There's good stress, bad stress, and there's actually two different kinds of stress. The goal of life is not zero stress. It's to live a life with healthy, manageable stress that can drive you forward and drive your life forward, rather than zero stress, which is actually biologically impossible.
Wow, that is really crazy, the fact that there are two different types of stress.
Yes.
I feel like it's so easy to kind of like group them together and say, like, I'm just experiencing stress.
Or like, I just want to stop feeling stressed. Like,
Exactly,
I feel like that's
like-
something that we hear and say a lot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so when you're experiencing one or the other, how can you tell what the difference is? And can you explain both of them to us?
Sure, that's a great question. So when you and I, when we say like, oh, I'm so stressed, it's been such a stressful week or a stressful month, what we're talking about is the bad kind of stress that in science is called maladaptive stress. Maladaptive stress has all sorts of the physical and mental health manifestations that we kind of talked about. So this whole conversation that we've had, we've actually been talking about maladaptive stress. But there is another kind of stress, good stress. In science, it's called adaptive stress. So what is adaptive stress? It moves your life forward. Everything good in your life was created because of a little bit of healthy stress. So what are some examples of healthy, good, positive stress? It is, doing well on an exam, or studying and really understanding the material. It is playing a sport and excelling at it, or doing an activity, or anything that you do, like maybe you set up an event in your school and you really felt proud of that achievement, or you made a new friend. Making friends is creating a healthy relationship with a new friend or a new person in your life. Maybe it's a relationship with a loved one, a romantic partner. All of these are good, healthy stress, because these sorts of events in your life, they're moving your life forward. And so what happens over time is when too much stress happens and the good stress starts morphing into that bad, unhealthy stress, that is when it becomes a problem. So stress inherently isn't a bad thing. It's just all about the dose of stress. And so right now, like we talked about, right, like there's no such thing as acute stress anymore. It's just always in the background at all times. And so many of us, if you're wondering, like, do I have good stress or bad stress? What's going on here? Chances are, for most of us, we all have a high level of bad stress. Data shows in a room of 30 people, 21 people are struggling with some form of stress or burnout. So if that is you, you are not alone. It is not your fault. Stress is more of a rule rather than an exception now. It wasn't always the case, but it certainly is now. A lot of it stuff that we've already talked about, right? Like the pandemic, the post-pandemic era, and all of these other factors that are really kind of closing in. And so, yes, in fact, there are two kinds of stress. They are not created equal. They affect your brain and body differently. And the goal of life is not zero stress. It is to live a life with healthy, manageable stress that actually serves you rather than harms you. And so a lot of my work is in transforming that unhealthy, maladaptive, negative stress back to healthy levels.
It is Mercedes and I's Wellness Summer, and to kick this off, we have been starting to do some amazing meditations using the Waking Up app. They have so many different meditations, and my personal favorite ones to use are these sleep meditations. They have huge 3-hour playlists that you can use, so you can definitely get some good rest.
Also, another really great part about waking up is it not only gives you a ton of access to meditations for all different occasions or times of the day, it also tells you tangible reasons why you should meditate and the actual importance behind this aspect of our wellness summer. So join us on our wellness summer and build the habit of meditation, mindfulness, and happiness into your daily routine by signing up for an annual subscription with Waking Up. And guess what? If you purchase your annual subscription using the link in our show notes, you get to save $30 off the subscription. So sign up now, use that code, claim your $30 back, and let's get on this wellness summer together.
Now let's get back into the episode.
That's so powerful. So powerful, because I think it's crazy to me how, you know, what you said there about stress is now the rule rather than the exception.
Definitely.
And I think it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like, yes, that's definitely sad, but I also think it's good to know that, like, you're not alone. If you're feeling stressed, we're not alone. Like, everyone kind of, I guess, most of the time is experiencing at some point stress, and so, like, knowing that you're not alone and that there's so many things that we can do to kind of take back that control from that maladaptive stress is fantastic. And also rephrasing kind of our thought process about stress, not just wanting to eliminate it from our lives, but just rather wanting to eliminate those non-productive aspects of that maladaptive stress. And I'm curious about your integrative approach, because you are a doctor, but you also embrace mindfulness and Eastern practices, which I think is so fascinating. So how did you come about this kind of combination of the two, and how do the two disciplines work together?
Ooh, you guys have such great questions. So I was a regular doctor. I never planned on this specialty or anything. I did my 4 years of medical school. I've done a lot of school. 4 years of medical, 4 years of college, then 2 years of my master's in public health, global public health, and I lived in Switzerland and Geneva working with the WHO Collaborating Center. I traveled to Kenya to work with a organization, HIV AIDS prevention. And then I went back to medical school. So I did 4 years of medical school. Then I did 3 years of internal medicine residency. So that is like typical internal medicine residency, where you see people in the hospital, you take care of things like heart attacks and strokes and diabetes and heart disease. The things like general practitioner. It's a little different than family medicine. And in Canada, it's a little also different than the US. So family medicine deals with its primary care, but it is lots of different age groups, right? So you take care of kids and also adults. And what I did, internal medicine, it's also primary care, but it's mostly adults. And you can also spend a lot of time in the hospital, so you can take care of like critically ill patients. I did that for 3 years. I was training to do that. I always wanted to do gastroenterology. When I thought, it'll be great. I'd learn about the gut and the mind-body connection and the gut-brain connection. And I truly fell into this line of work because of my personal experience that I shared. I was a second-year medical resident, and I had a stress struggle that was quite debilitating for me. And it lasted several weeks, though at the time it felt like, ages and months. And I never had any interest. I thought, learning about yoga and meditation, it was something that I was going to do as a hobby. I didn't know that you could actually work. And, back then, it was 25 years ago. And it was long before things like this were in the mainstream. And so one of my friends at the time, I was really having a crisis, not really sure what I wanted to do after my residency. And she said, well, what about integrative medicine? I said, what is that? Never heard of it. She said, look it up. There's a program here at Harvard. And so I did. I looked it up and I couldn't believe it. It was like, I remember that moment so vividly. There's moments like in movies where there's like it was like raining outside and I was post-call 30 hours. And I remember sitting in my desktop computer, a huge computer 25 years ago, and typing in integrative medicine and being so shocked because I had no idea that all of these things that I thought were just my hobbies was actually something real and a field of medicine that was emerging. And so I moved to Boston at the time to pursue a fellowship in this, and then the rest is history. But it was truly a transformative time. And then I did 3 years of a fellowship that was funded through the NIH, and I focused on the mind-body connection and bringing conventional therapies, or rather integrative therapies, into conventional medical care, mind-body therapies. And I studied that whole phenomenon. So I wrote my first paper. It was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Got a lot of press because it was about when doctors prescribe meditation, yoga, Tai Chi, those sorts of things. And so I did a lot of media work around that paper. And then I published another paper during my fellowship. It was called, it was about how doctors counsel for stress. So a really startling statistic is that 60 to 80% of all primary care visits in the US have a stress-related component, and yet only 3% of doctors counsel for stress. I assume that the number is probably similar in Canada because doctors, it's not that they don't realize that stress is a problem. Of course they do, but they are under so many demands on their time that they can't even, bring up stress. It's like opening up Pandora's box. And so that's what I focused on. And then I started getting more into media and health communication. I did a lot of work with print media. And then during the pandemic is really when my TV career took off and my speaking career took off. And so I now am a speaker. I speak all around the country and sometimes the world as a keynote speaker, speaking about stress, burnout, and mental health. And then I've done, I think 300 or 400 TV segments by now on these topics because I also have a public health background. I will say that, before I did public health and I did infectious disease, right? HIV, global public health. And then I transitioned, or so I thought, into this world of integrative medicine, managing stress and burnout and mental health. I never thought, guys, like in my wildest dreams that like infectious disease and global health would ever combine with stress and burnout. Like, why would they? And then we had the pandemic. And that's when all of my interests really came together because I had these two varied interests that were never really going to meet. And then we had a pandemic. And so that was really my moment of, I had to meet the moment. I, in fact, wanted to just paint. I told my friends, I don't really want to do any of this stuff. I just want to hang out in my house with my family and paint. And my friends were like, are you crazy? You have all this knowledge and people are really struggling. You better do something about that. And that's when I started writing more and doing more TV. Because my first instinct was like, all right, I'll just like hunker down and paint and, hang out with my family and not really do much forward-facing work. So it's been a journey. And I think anyone listening, my journey was not something that I had ever planned. It wasn't like I said, like, I'm going to be a doctor with a expertise in stress, because there was no such thing. And so especially now for the audience, like your audience listening, teenagers, there are so many worlds that have yet to be explored. We have technology that is like coming at us fast and furious, right? With AI and so many other things. Don't be afraid, lean in. Your career might not even exist. It certainly mine didn't, 25 years ago, I didn't even know that this was a thing. And so what you become and who you become is still very much something that is in development. So stay open to the various possibilities and opportunities ahead.
Incredible, and I agree. We talk so much about this on our podcast because of teens and like worrying about what the future is going to look like or committing to a job. And I love how dynamic your career has been and how it's truly become you, and you contribute so much positive impact to the world in so many different ways, whether it's, through your book, through your speaking, through your different media segments. And I think it's just so hopeful of like to teens who are listening that are like, oh, I don't know if I'm ever going to find something that really fuels my passion, or I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to really make a positive contribution or make a difference or do something interesting because of technology or AI or whatnot. Like, keep your eyes open and don't be afraid to try out new things, because you never know what the world is going to kind of bring up. And I love that aspect of your story so much. And thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your incredible wisdom and knowledge with us. This has been so insightful, and yes, thank you.
It was such a pleasure. I could speak to you guys for hours. Thank you so, so much. And if anyone wants to find me, you can follow me on Instagram at Dr. Aditi Nerurkar. I'm on TikTok and LinkedIn, and my book is available in 35 countries and 15 languages. It is called The 5 Resets. Rewire your brain and body for less stress and more resilience.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Hack Your Happiness, and thank you so much to Dr. Aditi for joining us today.
This episode was truly packed with so many amazing insights. Anastasia, what was your biggest takeaway?
I think my biggest takeaway is probably that stress is found everywhere, but there are 2 really tangible resets that we can use. And I have to say, I think the breathing one was really so striking to me because you can do it anywhere, even when you're going to your locker. And the best part is it's not noticeable, so you can really do it and it can really change your nervous
I love like
system.
the door, like while you're turning the door handle,
Absolutely.
That's such a great place
It's
to like
so
stop for a minute.
phenomenal.
For
How
a
about you?
second. I think one of my biggest takeaways is the fact that the goal is not to have a zero stress life. The goal is to, practice those resets, really focus on why am I feeling stressed, and just focus on having more of that productive stress, that urge to, know if, someone's a good person to be in your life, that urge to try harder at sports or studying or following your passions and interests. And I think that that's a powerful way to kind of reframe our mindset around stress. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, we think you would love our interview with Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, one of the 1% most cited psychologists. We spoke to Dr. Feldman Barrett all about our nonverbal cues, hacks to better control and understand our emotions, and also some of her most fascinating research discoveries.
Are there indicators, concrete indicators, that you can use to read somebody else's emotional state? And the answer is there are none.
You can listen to our interview with Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett now. It's linked in the show notes.
If you enjoyed this week's episode of Hack Your Happiness, please leave us a 5-star review from wherever you're listening. It really helps us out and we really appreciate it.
Also, be sure to bring us a small bit of happiness by following this podcast on whichever podcast listening platform you're on now. It really helps us keep Hack Your Happiness improving and going with each and every week, and it means the world to us. And of course, it's totally free. So follow along. See you next time.